This video is all about live shots. I've done my fair share, and so will you. Some were incredibly boring, and others more interesting. And my commitment to you is to give you the best information possible, and is why in this video, we sit down with the best live reporter you'll find. When you see his reel, I honestly feel you'll feel the same. His name is Ben Russell, and he's mentored me not only in this area, he's also a friend. This one is long, but by the end, you'll probably say it was worth every minute. He and I jump right in. Here we go. When you're first given a story, when in the process in your day do you start thinking about the live shot?
In a way, I think about it first. I guess I first think, what could I do with this? And if I get an immediate answer, well, then that helps inform how I'm going to approach interviews and what kind of video we're going to get. But more often than not, it isn't the first thing that I think of. I try to think of it, and I can't think of an immediate answer to that question, so I just approach the story. And then I wouldn't say my fallback, but one of my, I think, keys to more often than not getting something from maybe where there would have been nothing is, once I've done the story, I try to think about what's the most interesting thing in this story. What's the thing that might make someone go, oh, or appreciate something about this that they wouldn't have before, or I guess a lot of times what I'm also looking for is some level of a buy-in, something where I think that's one of the best things that a live shot does for people is or can do, is sort of bring somebody with you, make them, don't take for granted that they're going to A, understand what this story is about, or B, understand why it's significant or worth their time. And I think that's what a live shot can do in a lot of circumstances. Not everybody, or not every time, but I think there's an opportunity to find that piece that might maybe make somebody say, whether it's a fact or a stat or some demonstration that might make them say, oh, okay, now I get why this is something I should pay attention for the next minute and a half to.
And in terms of the trajectory, and we'll look at some in a moment, and I think this is how you would explain it to me in terms of your career, when you started building live shots, they were of course a lot simpler than what they are now. So for somebody that wants to begin to do what you are doing, where do they start? And then how do they sort of build and layer eventually on top of it?
I think number one is confidence. And even if you see something that I do or something that someone else does, you think, wow, I want to do that. I can't underline or underscore enough the idea that, well, first, I can't just crawl and then just walk, because if one is going to try to, say, oh, well, if you take a look, here I'm making fun of myself, but you might fail if you don't feel that, oh, I know I can do this. And if you're going to be thinking about what you're going to be doing as you do it, it's going to come across as pretty robotic and not natural. So my first advice would be just get past that initial stage of feeling just comfortable on live television, because that's not easy. And I don't know that I've met anybody for whom that just comes naturally. I think a lot of that has to just be worked through. I learned that on my second ever live shot, because my first one I nailed, as in I didn't do anything wrong and I didn't stutter or mess up in any sort of noticeable way. So the second time I said, oh, I've got this. And I didn't. And my second live shot I ever did was terrible and resulted in an immediate phone call from my boss asking me, A, what was that? But then not waiting for the answer to tell me, B, if anything like that ever happens again, you're never going to do a live report at the station again. So that was enough to make me say, oh, maybe I just need to feel this first before I can, stretch. So that would be my first genuine piece of advice, is just get comfortable with the idea of, oh, this is live, and oh, this is what I sound like. And that's probably not the fun answer, but that's I think the basic building block for any of this stuff.
And do you always, in terms of scripting out the live shot, organizing your thoughts, do what you taught me to do, the new, now, next formula?
Yeah, I think that just depends. I'd heard, I think it was Boyd Huppert had said, Boyd, has been, the NPPA, the National Press Photographers Association, Reporter of the Year many times. So his advice is worth listening to. You don't have to adapt everything, but he said something that I will misquote poorly, but the general gist of it is we aren't in control of the facts of the story. We'll go out and we'll learn things, but what we are in control of is in which order we deliver that information and which pieces of that information we feel are relevant for our viewers and for the purpose of our story. And so to that end, the idea of new, now, next, that's absolutely a viable and certainly, maybe a winning, that's probably not the right idea because who the heck knows what wins in ratings, but that is a very good approach. But I also think that sometimes it's worth taking Boyd's advice and thinking, okay, well, I know that the first thing I'm supposed to say when there's this police shooting is, if you can take a look behind me, you see that the police are here, and the latest in the investigation is that they can't yet tell us who did this. But maybe it might be more informative to not start with the most relevant piece of information, but instead set the scene to let people understand, guys, all the action's going on right here, but let's first take a look at where we are. This is a residential neighborhood. These are, $500,000 homes. These people, it might be contextual, and people might better understand the significance of what happened by setting the scene first, maybe. Or maybe it makes the most sense to jump to the end and say, like, this is the person who they're looking for, before you even exactly fully explain what happened. So, that's a hard one because I don't know that there is here's the way you should do it, because I think it just depends on the set of circumstances, on what pieces of information you have to work with, what the physical environment around you looks like. It just depends.
And setting the scene, that can be just as simple as a sentence, just giving that context in any way that it makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. I think it helps. I think it always helps to let people understand. The example I give, or I think of a lot, is if there's a tornado that happens in a town, in a neighborhood, anywhere, it's very easy to point the camera at the trees that are knocked down or the house. But maybe it just skipped a whole bunch of other homes right next door. So it might be worth mentioning, if not at the beginning, but somewhere. Yeah, guys, and not to say that something bad didn't happen, but to more emphasize, I don't know if people believe in luck or not, but this thing came right, it came past the Smiths' home and the Russells' home, and it came right to the Tennelians' home. And thank goodness they weren't home at the time, because look at what happened. And that just, and then you're done with it. You don't have to talk about anything else, but that gets people into, and it might give them that sense of, which I'm not saying you'd want to play with people's heartstrings, but it goes back to what I'm saying at the beginning. I said at the beginning, the idea that sometimes you got to give people a buy-in, I think, and not take for granted that they're going to say, oh, this thing's important. Sometimes it helps to whack them over the head with it and say, like, here is why this thing is fill in the blank, whatever it is, horrible, exciting, strange, whatever it might be.
Gotcha. Well, let's look at a few of these.
There's a big difference between a teenage prank and something much worse.
So 2 questions I have about that, which I should know because I've known you for so long. One, there's no live branding. Was that a tease?
That first one was a stand-up. That first one wasn't live. That was a 2-part stand-up into a package that I then did a live tag out of. I have done a version of that live on TV a couple of times. That story was about people who were throwing bricks, kids who were arrested for throwing bricks onto the highway. So my idea there was to just say, like, that's what it looks like when that happens. And I think there's a big difference between a teenage prank and something much worse. So yeah, that one wasn't live. I think most of these others are, or at least a good number of these are. This next one is, I know for sure.
Right. And with the, I'm assuming it's a junk car or a junkyard?
Yeah. So I've done this maybe 4 different times at 2 different TV stations for all multiple versions of the same kind of story. And yes, it's always been, I've called a tow truck place. And and a couple times I've had to call a couple of them, and often for reasons that are beyond my explanation, they have cars that they've towed that no one's ever come to claim, so they now own them and they're going to sell them for parts. And one of the parts they don't care about for some reason is the windshield. So they usually say, "Sure, I got one for you." So I mean, you never see the front of that car. There's just a shot of the from inside through the windshield.
Cool. Yeah. Now this one. This is the best by far.
Now, Rob, they found the gun used in this crime, and they also spoke with several people who identified these 4 suspects as the ones being guilty. But these men also left a trail for police to follow. And this is that trail. Take a look. These are the compiled police arrest records for all of these 4 men. Again, just 4 men, but look at this.
But yet with that one, when I show people your tape, one, I intro you. And we go to the Channel 5 website, we look at your bio. And so first they see the brick, and it gets their attention.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Then they see that, and they go, wait, I'm going to listen to this guy now.
Yeah, and the idea, maybe it goes without saying, but the idea for that one was, and that idea came to me. That's one where the live shot idea came to me sort of as the story was developing in terms of, I forget what the exact crime was. It was some maybe string of crimes. And there was a news conference, and the chief of police was talking about, these guys have, rap sheets a mile long. That they've had a lot of arrests, a lot of issues in the past. And he said something to the effect of like, their lives and their decisions were always leading them to this point. And it's almost like he sort of said it, and like the tumblers clicked in my head, and I thought, oh, there it is. I need to print out their rap sheets, and I need to sort of like look. These rap sheets are a mile long, and they, police say they essentially led them, right to the front door of the jail here. So that's one that it just kind of clicked in my head. This might be a good way to make people understand. Oh, these are bad guys who've been doing bad guy stuff for a long time.
Right.
But I can't put it quite like that.
No, right. But the one thing, when you told me the story, because you've told me the behind the scenes about most of these, is you said, Andrew, the longest part of my day was just like taping it.
Yeah, that took a while. And I tried, and just to show that was the correct way to do that, I did that again. I attempted to here at a story a few years ago. There was a man, an escapee, who killed a marshal who was taking him from Miami, Florida to Colorado, and they got off on an airplane at DFW Airport and had like 2 hours of a layover, and they went to the Walmart in Grapevine. And while they were coming out, the guy overpowered and killed the marshal and escaped. And police were looking for him. They ultimately ended up finding him a couple days later hiding in a barn of somebody's house near Lake Grapevine. But the police were talking about this guy's rap sheet's like a mile long. This guy's been in and out of jail his whole life, even when he was a kid. And I did an attempt of the same thing. I was, and this a few years had passed. This was at a different TV station. I felt like, this would be another good reason to use this. Except that time I didn't tape them down. That time I laid them down. And then a gust of wind. Now, it helped at least I was able to start and show at the beginning like this giant thick stack. But I was laying them down, and wind started blowing them away. And, in my mind, I said all of the bad words. But out loud, what I said is, well, this isn't going to work. But you certainly get the idea that this is not, this is not the first time police have been searching for this man. So I learned that is the correct way to do it. Tape them down. Don't just trust that I can lay them on the ground. Because wind will inevitably come by at that exact moment.
Two things there. And the first one is really, really important, is that in doing it that second way, you by no means were being lazy. You were trying to iterate and do the same thing a little bit differently, and it just didn't happen to work.
Yeah, it just didn't work. I mean, and in hindsight, it probably wasn't. This was the better way to do it, but I thought that perhaps the act of laying them down would at least, it would start with me and then go down, and we would see it lined up. But best laid plans, and it was good, I think, that I at least was able to bail out of it immediately and say, okay, well, you get the idea that, it wasn't ideal, but at least I spared myself the uhs and ahs and trying and failing. So, two failed attempts, and I think that was enough to just, let's move it along here.
But that's important because it's something I would have never thought of, especially in my first or a second job. But to sort of have an idea of, hey, let's say like this thing doesn't work. Just be prepared to admit it and move on.
Yeah.
And I would believe that the audience is probably very forgiving, not that necessarily like hear back from every live shot.
Yeah.
But they'll see you as a person. You were trying your best to make this interesting and to show this. And yeah, on that one, it just didn't work out.
Yeah, I think about that a good bit in terms of like you owe it to yourself and to your audience to try as best you can to come up with what if this doesn't work? Like if you're going to try something that's a little bit different, what if it doesn't work? Just have some way out. I don't know his name, so I don't have to worry about not naming names. There was a reporter I remember it was Las Vegas, and I'd seen this, I think, on YouTube as an example of just, and I put it on the reporter. I also put it on whatever producer in his ear. Should have just told him, just stop it. He was trying to demonstrate what's called a bump key. This sort of, these things that locksmiths have that arguably, or they say, can unlock anybody's door, and it's one of these sweeps kind of scare you pieces. And he was at someone's front door, and he said, look, with just a couple of taps you can unlock, and it didn't work. He said, oh, well, a couple of taps you can, and he tried it like 4 or 5 times, and it went on with just dead air for like 30 seconds. Like, he should have just said, all right, well, clearly I'm not a good burglar, but the problem is other people are. And then, he should have just had a plan for, like, after this doesn't work, like, twice, let's just, wrap it up. But he didn't, and I never want that to be me. Maybe it will be someday, but I'm going to try to make sure that it won't be by having an escape plan when I am going to try something a little bit different.
Thank you for walking through that specific thing, because between both of us, we've done everything on PPA, everything Pointer. We've watched stuff online. We've certainly been studying and begging people longer than we've been live to critique our stuff. Never has somebody in terms of stand-ups or live shots or anything said, hey, have a plan in case this doesn't go right.
Yeah, just like I said, owe it to yourself so you don't have this moment of panic. Now, the panic might come, but at least then you know what to do when it happens.
Just before 3 o'clock, as you had mentioned, a woman was working here in her backyard. When she turned and she heard a noise and saw this single-engine Beechcraft plane just clearing the power lines in front of her house. Again, she was standing about this area where I am now, and she watched as it came in towards her, and she knew she had a last-second decision to make.
So with that one, breaking and/or developing news,
you
probably didn't have a whole lot of time to get everything together and write that out. The first question is, that's a really, really good example of point A to point B.
Sure.
So how did you sort of organize that, or was it the, hey Photog man, I'm starting here, just follow me?
We had talked about it ahead of time. I mean, because aside from the fact that that's a little tiny airplane crashed into a tree, on a, one frame of a piece of video, it's not, at least in my mind, it wasn't super compelling. I mean, it's almost like it's just parked in the wrong place. But to me, what was amazing about it is that this family was playing in its backyard, and with little to no advanced warning, here comes an airplane that just skirts over the roof of their house and crashes and crashes into their tree. So I felt that, hey, this isn't just, it was an example of what I just said before about setting the scene. I think helps people kind of appreciate and say, oh, not like, oh gosh, I see a plane crash, but oh gosh, that thing just cleared their house and crashed into their backyard where you can see there's a little trampoline and other things like that. So that was an example, I think, of, I felt that, hey, let's show the plane, but then let's also show, but this thing in just here, look, we'll go this way, because that's not super easy for the photographer to go here, to go there. I think he maybe even zoomed to the house a little bit, then came back out and came over. So yeah, that took a little bit of coordination, and we practiced that probably a couple of times, just to make sure we had the timing kind of right.
How often, not that there's one specific number, for something like that, do you practice 2 times, 3 times, as much as you can before the launch?
I would say twice. Like, I would like to have done it, some version of it twice well. Sure. Just so I'm like, okay, we can do this, which goes back to what I said before about the confidence thing. Like, I mean, even now, I've been doing live shots just about every day for like 16 plus years. the being on TV part doesn't like move my meter at all, but it's more like, okay, there's this thing we want to do and I want to make sure we can do it right, and it involves timing, with you and the photographer if you have the benefit of having one. So that, something like that, I'd like to do 2 good versions of it probably, and then I'm like, oh, okay, we can do this. And then you just got to make sure you stick to the order of things, because just like I don't want to have to panic if something goes wrong, I don't want to make the photographer have to wonder, wait, he's not doing the thing that he said we were going to do. Where's he going now? I don't want to make them have to, what's happening now?
And in terms of communication with the photographer, I mean, all the stuff on here, clearly you're communicating. And obviously, the photographer for most of this happens to be a very good friend of both of ours. Yeah. But especially, and I mean, people will find this in any shop they're at. It's just smaller markets and medium, they'll find it more, to where so many reporters will work with a photographer who may not want to work that day. And now, in fairness too, there are reporters that just like being on TV and don't want to work that day, but the photographer really wants to do well. Are there ways to better communicate with the photographer or better persuade a photographer that is not, we'll say, nearly as motivated?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because I, like at that TV station, I don't know the exact number. Maybe there were 10 photographers, and I would say half to just over half were probably very easy to work with, and if I had an idea, they would say sure, or some version of yeah, or if not that, what about this? But there were 2 who I can think of specifically who just, no, might be better just to stay here on the tripod and do that. So with those people, because they are people and because they have, a career and a life that they want to live, I think I remember more so than not, like picking my battles. Now that's one where if I'd shown up to that with one of these photographers, I would have said like, hey man, this is I think the way to do it. Like, and they are people, and I don't enjoy saying like this is the way it's going to be done, and I wouldn't say that. But with one in particular, I'm sure I would have been like, hey, I know, man, but like I guarantee you this is going to look really good if we do this. With others, at other times, that story wouldn't be the example, but others, I might just for myself call it a loss and figure out some other way, some other element of the story that I feel like I can put my particular style or brand or I can get something out of it. So I mean, those conversations are going to happen, and I think the more that you're just a generally approachable and level-headed person, the more likely it will be that when you have a thing that you want to do, that someone's going to say yes. Like if you're Chicken Little, or if you're always stressed out, or if you're always just chattering someone's ear off, like they aren't, I think, going to hear you as well, and they won't know the difference between like, oh, that's just Ben on a Tuesday versus like, oh no, Ben really means this, so yeah, what the heck, why not? Let's do it. I give advice like that to young reporters all the time. Like if you have the benefit of working with a photographer, do what you can to make sure those people like you, because you need them way more than they need you. And that's always going to be true. And I mean that, and that doesn't mean it's like a purely transactional relationship that it's like, well, be good to them so you get what you want. Just be good to them, like be good to everybody. But know that deep down, if you're a reasonable person who's easy going to some degree when it matters, and then serious when it does matter, they'll know the difference. And I've found, at least for me, I think, that's worked for me professionally with my relationships with photographers, when there have been times when there's moments of, oh, I'm not going to get to do the thing I want to do today. And sometimes that's just going to happen, I think. And then other times when you have an opportunity, I would hope that you at least wouldn't be, afraid's not the right word, but intimidated or put off in the asking. Because if you've got something, you never, the worst they'll say is no.
Right. And, is there something, and I know that you would never use this as bargaining, and I didn't either when I was doing live shots, but in terms of, you've got your work at the station, you've got your reputation, was there sort of an intangible, unspoken currency of, yeah, let's do what Ben wants to do. Because if I'm the photog on that live shot, that gets to go on my tape, and this is going to be good.
Yeah, sometimes, absolutely. With a couple of photographers that I can think of who I've worked with in the past, maybe less so because they are where they're going to be, or at least where they plan to be. So they're not climbing or see themselves as climbers, and they may. And the couple I can think of, you know, it isn't just being a TV news photographer. If they were a plumber, or if they were a chef, like if they were a chef, they wouldn't take too kindly to the guy who came in who has maybe a different way to season the steak. Like, no, we use salt and pepper here. Like, well, that's good, but what if we used, a little bit of, something else too, some garlic salt maybe? Nope, that's not the way we do. Like, you're just going to find those people in life. But yeah, I think that there's some of that. I know that there's been some of that. I know I've had 2 specific conversations that I can recall of people who said something of like, well, I should probably do it. That way I'll get my name on the email tomorrow or something like that. So yeah, I think that can help.
All right, yeah, we'll keep going here.
The biggest difference here will be that things won't be exactly as they appear. That's because we're not talking about the amount of snow that's falling, but the wind that will be blowing it around. And if this is going to be the view through your windshield and you're driving, you're bound to be in for trouble.
I can before you even ask, so that live shot was hey Ben, it's gonna snow really bad tomorrow. Tonight it's just cold, but we need you to talk about the snow that's coming tomorrow. And I'm thinking to myself, I mean, what am I going to do? I mean, it's not snowing tonight. I'm talking about tomorrow here. And so when we were talking it was with someone with the highway department, and he was talking about, their biggest concern was more of like these blizzard conditions, not so much snow accumulation, but snow and wind everywhere, and it's going to white out people's, it's visibility. And I thought, oh, okay. Well, I wonder if we can somehow make visibility go away. And that's foam tire cleanser. The stuff that you spray on a tire to, and then buff off to make it better. So that's what that is. I mean, that's not exactly what it looks like, but that's the idea. That's the concern. And I'm saying something to that effect, like it's not so much the amount of snow, but it's the snow blowing around and it's the visibility. So that was a solution to my personal problem that night of, what am I supposed to show or do when there's nothing happening now? And I mean, there didn't have to be because I'm talking about tomorrow, but so that's what happened there.
And weather is so important to bring up, because just how many times, I know the answer is going to be a lot, have you been told, go out and do this thing that's not happening? Or even too, where hey, go out and do the preview of the event. Nobody's there, there aren't posters up, the doors are locked. But to where you're approaching it, you're framing it differently than most other people who would think, this is boring, I don't want to do it, I want a better story, why didn't you tell me to go do one of the ideas that I pitched to you? Right. You're saying, okay, I'm in this situation, what can I do?
Yeah, I mean, that happens a lot. I mean, it does. Some version of that, of the problem solving. And that's I was talking with a new reporter at a station about that recently, because she was asking me like, so how do you approach, your idea with live reports a lot? And I thought of it, and I don't know that I'd ever put it like that specifically, but I said, I don't know, I kind of look at it as a problem solving thing. I have this problem, It's not always a big problem, and it's certainly not a major problem, but it's the idea of like, what can I do to get the attention of the people, who are going to watch this story? And sometimes it's a very easy problem to solve. Sometimes the facts alone are enough, and I don't need to, do any, spraying on the windshield. Sometimes if you just, set up a good-looking shot and talk about what happened, that's just compelling enough. And it's important to know the difference, because sometimes if you're doing a story about the child abuse case where and it's the trial that day, maybe it's best not to do some song and a dance or whatever. Maybe it's best to just approach it straightforward, because what happened is impactful enough that you don't need to dress it up any, and you risk being, glib or not paying enough respect almost to the subject matter. So that's important to know too. But yeah, I mean, weather-related things, previewing events that are going to happen and it hasn't happened yet. On the morning show, I work on the morning show. We talk about something like, I can't say how. Multiple times a month, I'll do a story about, hey, this thing is going to happen later today, but it ain't happening at 6 a.m, except that's when I got to be live on TV. So yeah, that happens fairly often, the idea of what do you do now, of being presented with that thought of what are you going to do now.
I was once given the advice, and it seemed good, so I'm curious your perspective. If you want to get good at live shots quickly, look for and go after a morning show job. Because you're on once every half hour, yeah.
Yeah, more often I would think. Yeah, I mean, I'm maybe the same thing can be true for people who go live in the afternoon shows. There are some stations, maybe a lot, that might have you might go live twice in the afternoon, maybe more than twice. So, I mean, maybe like with a lot of stuff, repetition, just like what I'd mentioned at the beginning. Like, I think you just need to get comfortable. And the easiest way that I could prescribe for people to get comfortable is just do it. And so, yeah, that reporter, the new reporter at a station I mentioned, she had worked at the morning show at her last station, and that was in West Palm Beach, Florida, which is market 30-something, I think, or 40-something.
Yeah, it's a good market.
But she did the morning show there for about 6 months, and she said they went live like 7 times in the morning. Like
3-hour show?
It was the NBC station, but it was an NBC Fox duopoly, and so after 7 a.m. on the Fox station, they still had a show that went for 2 hours from 7 until 9, and so she said she would often do 7 or 8 live shots in the morning, and she said she would kind of come up with 2 live shots and do this one this half hour, then A on this half hour and B this half hour, and then go back to A, then go back to B, and I don't know, I wouldn't know what else to tell somebody to do. I don't know that I can come up with 8 different ways to do something. At a certain point, if you try it 8 different ways, probably 6 of them are going to be bad. So yeah, I mean, yes, I would think that the morning show, maybe more than the others, shifts, so to speak, might get you, if nothing else, in the habit of being on again and again and again.
Yeah. So yeah, with the morning show, for those who may not know, you're going live at least twice an hour, and typically a market has at least a 2-hour newscast. Mm-hmm. Sometimes even in a market like this, I think we got 3 because we start at 4 or 4:30 at least at Channel 5.
Yeah, we're on it from 4:30 to 7. That's the same at the CBS station, CBS 11, 4:30 to 7. I can't remember if WFAA starts at 4:30 or at 4. Maybe it's 4:30 to 7. The Fox station is on from 4 until 10. And that's, they'll sometimes, not necessarily swap out reporters, but they'll phase out the ones who started going live at 5 to 6. Maybe they're finished doing live things maybe by 8. And then they have sort of a second wave who comes in and starts going live at 6, and they're on through 10. So, but yeah, that's a lot of time to fill. And yeah, I would say I'm at least going live twice a morning. 2 to 4 times a morning is the number of times I'm going live in our 2.5-hour show.
Yeah, and one more quick point too, because people who are watching this may not understand the idea of the morning show. Mm-hmm. And that is, yes, it's a 2-hour block, but the goal is that in terms of capturing an audience, comes in 15-minute increments. It's when they get up and they get ready, they have you on, and then they're going to work.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, I mean, I have to go on what I've been told in market research, and I only put so much into it because at a certain point, like that I will admit some of that's over my head. But it would seem as though the general consensus thought is that the morning show is not watched as much as it is listened to. And because people have it on as they're going on, they're listening for their weather, their traffic, and some of the news of the day. And it's interesting too. It's a show that also its audience builds as it goes along. Like, we have far more people watching at 6:45 than we did at 6. And the typical stacking of a newscast would teach you that, your most important story goes at 6 or at 6:01 or something like that. But there's something to be said for a morning show that maybe your big stuff should go at 6:30 and not at 6, because there are just more people up and watching, and define watching how you will, again, if they're moving about and doing their morning routine. But it is interesting in that regard. And yeah, you do sort of produce to 15-minute segments. In that 15 minutes, you want to make sure that there's a weather forecast, there's a traffic report. There's probably 2 traffic reports in that time, and a bit of a smattering of local and national news. Yeah, and it's not necessarily wash, rinse, repeat, but at a certain point, excuse me, we don't have 2.5 hours of brand new content. You will see some of the same things again, maybe repurposed, maybe presented slightly differently, but yeah, I mean we don't have that much going on.
Right, I know Market does. Cool, we'll keep going here because I think this is the car one.
But this is, like you said, something that Pennsylvania drivers actually don't need to take personally. They're not blaming us for this study. In fact, they're placing the blame squarely on the shoulders of the people who work in that giant domed building right over there.
The one thing I'll say that I remind students of, because again, they're so captivated after the first two, they're really they're writing these down as ideas, which I know is definitely something you've always been an advocate of.
Yeah. I would absolutely. My advice. I mean, heck, it's not just TV live shots. It's sort of anything. If you see someone who's doing a thing that you're interested in, borrow from it. I'm not telling people to plagiarize things, but see it and think, oh, how can I adapt that to this? Tuck it away in your memory bank. Keep it in your notes. Think about what you liked about that thing, and then think about how can I apply some version of that to something else. And I mean, again, that's just, I think, good professional advice.
Right, and for that one specifically, typically it's not every semester, but probably in a year I'll have one or two. So hey, isn't there a little bit of danger to that? I'm like, guys, he's in an empty parking lot.
Yeah,
it's because you were looking at the magic of it. You don't realize.
Yeah, we were in an empty parking lot. We were probably I don't think I had my foot on the accelerator. We were driving, but I think it was just crawling along. That was sort of plan B for that story. Plan A was to be the photographer in the back seat, and I would be looking back, and he would kind of zoom past me to the Capitol building, but we just couldn't.
It's hard with big cameras.
Yeah, we just couldn't make it work, and he had said, well, what about this? That was a deal where the photographer had suggested we could maybe do it like this instead, and we tried it. That's one that we practiced maybe about 4 or 5 times, just to make sure the timing was down, because there's a cable attached to the back of that camera, and we just wanted to make sure there weren't any concerns that would happen. We wanted to find out if there's going to be a problem, let's practice the problem, not have this happen on live TV. Because I don't know that I would recommend that. But you're right that we're not driving on the road. Right. That's in an empty parking lot at 11 o'clock at night with a car that's just crawling at whatever speed a car crawls at.
Yeah, and then something else too. When you're saying the camera was attached to a cable, obviously that's going to a live truck, which I'm assuming most students would think now. Yeah. But nowadays, especially at 5. You would probably do it with a Live View or a Dejero.
Yeah, it's really amazing how quickly the technology has jumped from, a camera with, a video cable connected out, an audio video cable, that's connected to a truck, to now, we use the specific technology we use at Channel 5 is Dejero. But there's Dejero, there's Live View, there's there's a third company that I know of as well. But yeah, these are backpacks, literal backpack units that have that pull in data signals, cell phone data signals, and it's like bundling 12 phones together essentially, and putting out all of their combined data capability, pushing that out at a very comparable broadcast quality signal. And yeah, it does cut down on the equipment you have to roll out with, the ease of getting in and out of buildings, of parking lots. A big TV live truck with its mast is 12 feet tall. That literally limits the places you can park and get to. It's made things a lot simpler.
And one question about that before we get into this one, and this one I really want to talk about because it's the most engaging and natural because you're really there. In talking about tech, because when we were in school, your school had to have a station to be able to even broadcast and say, hey, I was on TV somewhere. But even then, to do live, you were probably rolling the cable like we were out the back door of Master Control of the newsroom, going live from the newsroom.
Right. Yeah. You're 50 feet that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Nowadays, though, as I coach students, they've got YouTube Live, Facebook Live. Make a reporter account for yourself and just start doing stuff. What would you add to that?
Yeah, I would, the adage of, act as if. I would, don't have any bit of like self, where you might limit yourself and think, oh, well, no, who would care? Who would watch that? Yeah, if you made a Facebook, journalism account for yourself, and if you happen upon something like, I don't know that I would advise somebody just go out and like go up to people, know that people might not appreciate that. But if you find yourself at an event or at something, treat it as though, hey, I'm going to act like I'm the reporter covering this thing. Even if that's not breaking news, even if you're at like the campus pep rally ahead of the big game, why not throw up a Facebook Live feed and tell the world who you are and give them a look at what's going on, and then maybe you approach people and if you do want to say like, I'm Ben with Student TV. We're talking to people about what's going on. What do you see here? What do you make of all this? I would absolutely say do that. Don't worry about, oh, well, who cares? Who cares? You should. It would give you, again, I think it all goes back to building that confidence of, oh, I can do this, because I think you can. It doesn't start that easy, because there is that level of anxiety and all of the performance aspect of it that just has to be learned and gotten past. But yeah, I would say absolutely do that. It will be an invaluable learning experience, I think.
In this day and age, what do you think about that? Because it's a sort of a hypothesis, but we've been in the business so long, it's like I really think this would work. Because obviously, some college campuses have incredible resources, and then a lot more just simply have fewer.
Sure.
But the cell phone or GoPro or whatever you're using to go live, in my opinion, levels the playing field in going for a first job, especially a second job, in that you can begin to go live wherever you are. And we've had students here, and again, compared to the rest of the world, the program here is a little bit smaller. And again, these were part-time, nighttime students too, which I want to underscore. They work a 9 to 5. When the recent tornadoes happened 3-4 weeks ago, they didn't even ask, which is beautiful. They just thought, hey, for my next news package, I'm going out and I'm covering the storm. So they went to Home Depot, or they were in the neighborhood and they actually got, if I showed it to you, they got like real sound that you would air on the news.
Yeah. That's great.
So, I was incredibly proud because they did it all on their own. Yeah. There was no email from me saying, hey guys, there's an opportunity. Yeah. They just, out of, there were 7 of them, and the majority of them, they're like, hey man, I had this other idea, like I changed, is that okay? Yeah, that's cool that you stopped down to cover real breaking news. But again, if they've got on their tape that they're trying to get into market whatever is their first job, they've got some Facebook Lives, and then they've got, hey, here's the actual package that I made, and regardless if it aired like on like town cable or campus cable, my opinion is the news director would actually look at that.
I don't see why not. I can't speak for every person in markets, well, I can't speak for anybody else really. But I would hope so, and I would hope that would be a person who would understand that there is a skill set to be learned here, and that I would think that for that first job, and even for that second job at a slightly bigger market, I would say that I wouldn't be looking for a finished product. I wouldn't be looking, like, I'm not going to see Lester Holt, but what I might see is someone who can think on their feet and who can change gears and can respond to what's happening in the world around them, like the live shot we're about to look at there. Like someone who can just take in what they're seeing, process it, and talk about it in a way that I get something from. Facebook Live, I think, is great for that. It's great practice to do that, because if you're at, I think the example I gave was, the pep rally. If you're going to be walking around, hey, here's some students here, they're getting signs together, and here's the marching band. I mean, the things are going to change. If you're at a tornado damaged neighborhood, there are a lot of potential things that you might see or come upon, And I think if I would watch a minute or two or whatever it is of someone's tour that they might do via Facebook Live, I think that I could learn a lot about what skill set this person's working with. And oh, here's what they can do now, but I might be able to, take this aspect and help them flourish and get better and learn to focus on these things and not those things or whatever it might be. So yeah, absolutely. I think there's a wealth of opportunity out there to take advantage of the equipment you do have, the technology you do have, because it isn't always an equal playing field. I remember at my college, I went to West Virginia University, and we had it sounds, at least in conversations I've had after, a pretty decent program in terms of what we had available to us and what was expected of us as student journalists. But some kids I worked with right out of the gate who had gone to the University of Georgia, I was floored by the technology and the demands upon them, and gosh, how I felt like, wow, these guys are really good already. And I felt like that program, I mean, I'm sure a lot of it had to do with them, but they had to jump through a lot of hoops to get to where they were, and I think it made them all the better for it. But yeah, so I think, some of the stuff you're talking about that's sort of, ubiquitous across the board, everybody has access to it, you should absolutely take advantage of it because other kids will.
That's a good point too. Yeah, the ones who really want the job, they're trying to figure out what resources they have and then how to take full advantage of that. Yeah. In terms of in the morning, you're doing a lot, like actual live. Mm-hmm. One, are you asked to do Facebook Live or do a certain amount of social media hits? And if you aren't, because the morning crew, like you're really trying to fit in a lot in that 4 hours. Yeah. Are the what I would call dayside or nightside reporters asked to do the same thing?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't think they would want us to do a Facebook Live from nothing to talk about nothing. But, I mean, if you're at an event, yesterday there was an incident's probably not the right word, a crash on 635 over 35 in Dallas where a big rig truck slid in the ice and kind of like the truck part went halfway over a bridge and the trailer was still up on but so I mean a reporter who showed up to that, she did a Facebook Live from it that when I saw it 40 minutes after it had aired, after she had done it, it already had like 40,000 views. So I mean that was compelling stuff, like showed that to people, they will watch that. Yeah, I mean they ask us to post about our stories, and I'll usually post about excuse me, I often just figure out what I think is the most interesting stuff, whether it's my stuff or not, and I post about that. Now, I give credit. I'll say, look at this. I won't do what I do. But, I'll post a piece of video from somebody's story or a soundbite or some, photograph and, with a link to the story, and I'll credit and tag the person who did it. Like, I'm not trying to pass it off as it's my work, but I think, hey, I mean, social media is a great way to get the news a la carte, like to just pick and choose the stuff that you want where you don't have to watch the entire newscast to get it. And that's scary in a little bit in terms of like longevity and job security. But it is very user friendly. And so, yeah, so I post a lot. And it's been a long time since I remember seeing some mandate, because I've seen them in the past, like you will post 4 times a day. I remember seeing that at one point, but I think it's generally just understood that you should, and it'll only do good for you if you do, because typically speaking, the more you post, the more people will go to your posts, and then the more people who go to your posts, the more likes or follows you might get, and then the more likes or follows you get, the more people will see it. And it's not about I don't look at it in terms of like the ego, like, oh, look how many people, liked my page or followed my page. It's more like, no, that's more people who are going to see it, and then more people who will potentially share it with other people, and then it's just building an audience in a whole other world.
Do they care, Facebook, Twitter, where you post, how you post?
I'm sure they do. I probably buck the system. Twitter, I've had sort of a love-hate relationship with Twitter to the point that now I almost never go on Twitter because it's just it's not a wasteland. It's the opposite of a wasteland. A wasteland is this barren place that nobody exists. Twitter is like overpopulated with people who have an opinion and are willing to share it, and not just share it, like shout it at you. And it's a little too rough for me almost. And that doesn't mean I have delicate sensibilities, but it's just, I try to avoid Twitter as much, and I probably shouldn't. There are a lot of journalists, and there is a lot of journalism on Twitter, and that's good. And so just if I was giving someone advice, I would absolutely tell them to go to Twitter, because you'll find a lot of content there. Like that a la carte way of consuming the news is very easy to do on Twitter. But in terms of me engaging with people on Twitter, I've done that, and I don't do it as much. Facebook and Instagram. Facebook, I know that she's the old gal, but there's still a very viable audience, and like the people who do, news demographic things will tell you that some version of like the average viewer of TV news might be a mom in her, late 40s or something like that. And that's often the same person who's like your average Facebook user. So, I mean, there's a lot of carryover in terms of who your audience is. And those people are also very likely to share news, like literally share. So they're also less likely to check the source of information. That's why a lot of things, I think, especially on Facebook, seem to get shared that's just wrong. I mean, it's a lot of things, but it's just inaccuracies. But yeah, and Instagram is viable as well. To me, I found it harder to, it's. I'm not saying it's easy to post a good picture, because that's a skill set too. But like, it's harder for me to conceive of how to package a piece of news content on Instagram. It's so much easier. This isn't about skill set, but it's so much easier to show, like, look at me in this beautiful, amazing place or whatever, or to take a behind the scenes photo of a thing. It's hard that I've yet to find a way to really hit the ground running in terms of packaging news content in some sort of a way that's user friendly for Instagram, but I'm trying.
Yeah, the only reason why I asked, and I know this was a while ago, when TV research was trying to figure out social, they made a deep dive and they put a lot of money into researching Twitter. And back at 5, 30 Rock was investing a lot in Twitter research. Not that they're still focused on that now, I have no idea. But yeah, just because Facebook is just so huge and really is its own, it's like there's social media, and then you can almost say there's Facebook. I was just curious sort of what the feeling was, but it just sounds like, hey, as long as you're posting.
Yeah, as long as you're posting, as long as you're active. I mean, the more active you are, I'm sure there's some upper limit of like, okay, you can't, like, you're just white noise now. But I mean, if you're like, people like content and people like good quality content. And so, I mean, yeah, the more you can do that, I'm assuming, all the more better it will be, for your, for yourself, and for whoever it is stuff that you're pushing out there, whether it's your own or your colleagues.
All right, the fire scene. Because yeah, this is I will tell you when we're done here, I had never been this close to a scene, like with apparatus and fire people. And as people will see, you are very much behind all the yellow tape, but this is such a big scene, there's just so much stuff there.
Sure.
This is a firefighter who's actually having his removed because he's been in and battling the blaze, and looking down to the right now, these are the expend air tanks. I see maybe 24 of these things. That speaks to the number of people who have been here. But over here, I want to show you, this is what they are battling over my shoulder down this street about 100 yards on East King Street. This fire continues to burn.
Yeah, so that's one where I would bet that if you lined up, there are 4 TV stations in that market. Probably all 4 of us were there going live. I would bet that the majority of reporters would be on a tripoded live shot, which is always a good thing to do. There's nothing wrong with that. This isn't about tripods. But I mean, they would be framed up with the fire building, over their shoulder. They would be in the center of the screen, and you'd see some of the fire behind them, and they would say, "That's exactly right, anchor name. If you take a look behind me, you see the situation, it continues, and let's take a look at the video." What I did there was attempt to sort of set up the scene. And that wasn't my first live shot at that fire. So I'd done a couple, and so my memory is that, my motivation there was, okay, we've talked about the fire, and we're going to talk about it again, but let's sort of help set the scene, as I talked about before, of look at what all it's taken to get to this point so far. And that's where, all these guys, just before that, the man who was sort of standing there, the firefighter was just standing there. Had we been on TV maybe 30 seconds earlier, he was really fighting to get his air tank off, and he had a big mask on. That was the guy who had just come out of the fire. And so that's what we had access to, because, yeah, as you said, the fire is happening, half a block away or whatever. We aren't up at that, but what we are up close to are the people who are shuttling in and out to fight it. And that just seemed, I don't know, impressive to me. And so that's what we were calling. So I show all that and I say, that's happening. And oh, by the way, the big thing is that building down there continues to burn, which that isn't to bury. I hope that doesn't give viewers or anyone watching this, the thought that oh yeah, bury the lead. To me, it was more about let's establish, hey, look at what all is happening here, and let's take advantage of the environment around you. Because yeah, we can talk about the fire, but the fire's way down there. What we can't talk about is holy smokes, look at what it's taking to do this. I also said the word expend. I don't know that that's a word. Every time I've seen this after the fact, I'll do that sometimes, even in conversation and on TV, when you'll say a thing and you'll think, did I say the right thing? And that's one where I'm like, was that a word? Is that a word? I don't know. I said it though, so let's just keep moving.
In terms of burying the lead, the anchors took care of that. And we're going out to a fire, and then we're going to see you in progress of wherever you are.
Yeah.
And then you've certainly covered a lot of fires, and,
Sure.
and we'll cover even more. In terms of just the visual stuff you had access to as a background, this is one of the few times you've ever been able to really sort of, and when you're doing this, you're also, for those who really know how to look at it, while you're in there, you're also not intrusive. Because they're laying all the tanks down. They're not trying to get in and run through you.
Yeah, right. And you can see just above where it says breaking news, there are big giant the hoses that they're running. That's one of the logistical things you have to be aware of if you're around fire trucks and fires, because they run these things out and they will knock you down if you're near them and they turn them on, and they are far less concerned often with whether you're there or not than they are getting the thing done that they're there for. But you do yourself and everybody a favor if you just be situationally aware and don't get in their way, and act as if be respectful and be aware of what's going on around you, and nod and don't bother them. But yeah, I mean, that was a particularly large fire that was taking a lot of resources to fight. They aren't always that big. And yeah, you aren't often necessarily that up close, sometimes even by choice, because it's loud and there's a lot going on. And the story is almost always what's happening at the fire. But this is one where we were being kept so far back that, I sort of had to pivot in a way and think about, okay, well, the story that I can tell right now is look at what it's taking to do this work right now.
Cool. All right, we'll move on to Channel 5.
Look at this large chunk of twisted sheet metal that was the roof of this building. It flew over here, impaled itself through this wrought iron fence, and wrapped itself around the tree. Imagine seeing this flying through the air. This easily weighs hundreds of pounds, and there's stuff like this scattered everywhere.
It's just so natural.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, I'll mind my P's and Q's here. I mean, I think the reason why that is an effective way to tell the story is because you're there, you're the reporter, and you're at this thing, and you're talking to people who aren't there, and they haven't seen this, and it's your job to sometimes say, holy smokes, look at this thing that happened, because that's I think, the natural reaction that people have. And so, I mean, that was impressive. Always seems to have like a positive connotation. That's the whatever version of impressive that's negative. I mean, there were pieces of sheet metal like that just impaled into trees, thrown everywhere off of this big warehouse that had blown apart after a tornado. And so that was me just saying, wow, look at that thing. People are going to be wowed by that. Let's help them to get wowed by it. And you can see I walk up, I kind of kick it with my foot. That I can't remember if that was a particularly planned move or not, or if I just kind of did it. I might have just done that. Although I would tell people, just like I have told people, if you're going to interact with a thing, why not touch it? Or if you're going to talk about a TV remote control, you'll see a TV news reporter often go like, the television remote control allows you to control it from a distance, and you never look at the thing and you don't interact with it in a way that's natural. But I mean, I think it's far more, I've said like, the TV remote control, allows you, like, if you're going to talk about a thing, look at the thing, touch the thing. And so, I can't remember on that specific one if I'd planned to sort of kick that with my feet. But I know that I knew that if I would kick it a little, it would like make a noise and it would, wobble and so whether I planned it or not, I think I knew, I know what's going to happen when I do this. I'm certainly not strong enough to knock it down on accident. So yeah, I mean, I would advise people to touch the thing you're talking about, to engage, interact with it in some way. That doesn't mean touch the live wire or whatever, but I mean, I would hope that gave it just an extra little bit of reality, like, he touched the thing. That doesn't mean you go rooting through people's homes, when a tornado comes through. It's always a fine line, but I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking, wow, but I can't say wow. So you have to, present it in a way that I think, that people actually get something from, because I think it's going to make people say, wow, because it's, natural disasters and things like that are full of opportunities to explain that. Like that image alone, I think, helps explain a lot of just how powerful the thing was that happened. So yeah, I can't remember if I planned that little foot wobble or not.
Yeah, I was just so curious because again, I've known you for so long, and I know how you are very much an advocate of planning and things. Yeah. But the foot is just so small and so natural. I was just curious because I'm sure on some live shots, because you're in your groove, and you have the earned confidence of, if you go and do that, you're not going to throw yourself off because you sort of know what you want to say.
And the knowing what you want to say, I think that's advice I give people a lot too. That I write the stuff that I want to say when there's time to, and there usually is. If there's not, I don't. But I write the things that I want to say, and I'll go through the things that I want to say, but I'm trying less to memorize than I am just know that these are the points I want to get across. Because I found, for me, maybe there are others who will be able to memorize far more better than I would, but I've found that if I attempt to memorize something, and then if I get off track a little bit, which inevitably happens, on some fairly regular basis, I have a harder time getting back on course if I've totally committed it to memory, as opposed to just kind of wanting to understand the material, the material, or wanting to understand where I want to go with things. Because if I committed it to memory, maybe I would have been less likely to see that moment as an opportunity to say, to kick on the thing or to tap on the whatever, anything that you can do potentially to interact with the world around you. So yeah, I think it's better to plan than it is to memorize, if that makes any sense.
And when did you become comfortable doing that? Because that'll go into the question of, do you think there's anything that we can tell journalism students or even people in their first job that will actually convince them to take that advice? And I say that because I had been told a little bit of what you had just said, both in school and in my first job. And I was still so horrified there was certainty in memorizing.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. And exactly what you said happens, where it's when you don't hit a word, you're throwing yourself off.
Yeah, and that's because, and I know that for me personally from experience, from overly committing to the scripted words that I'd written, and then, you know, things happen, you know, some noise happens in the background, or just, you know, in your own headspace, you get off, and it's hard. I have found it's hard to recover, because there's a lot of recovering that's necessary sometimes with live reporting, that it's harder to recover when you've memorized, as opposed to knowing that these are my big points I want to hit. Now, that doesn't mean I write it and I read it through, and you know, like I write it and then I'll read it back before I even like try to perform it, so to speak. And then when it comes to actually doing it, I more have my script as a reference point than I do as these are the words that you're going to say. Although I do try to, like, I think I end that live shot, or at least the portion that we saw there from me saying like, and there's stuff like this everywhere. I do try to have planned like some lines that I know that like, well, I'm going to say that's sort of my, because the video probably started rolling right there. Like I have certain like roll cue lines, both for director back at the station's sake and for my sake, in terms of, I know that, because I want to hit my points. And if I don't have a plan, then it can be much more sort of stream of consciousness talking, and then there's no real end point, and it's harder to make a point. So yeah, I try to plan it out as opposed to commit it to memory, with some exceptions, like that line. Like I don't remember that specifically. I mean, I remember the story, but I know that I'm positive that like, and there's stuff like this everywhere. Like that's a line that I knew, okay, I'm going to say this exact line again for a director back at the station to then hit the video to roll, so that they know, oh, that's the point, you know, where the video should be. And also for my sake, to know when to land and punch a line. Not to say like, you know, and there's stuff like this everywhere, you know, but just it helps me at least to have some very specific pre-planned, you know, either a roll cue or the very last thing I want to say at the very end before I tag out with my name, because I feel like it helps sort of punch the point that you're going to make, as opposed to just, oh, the report's over now. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, and this is really super advanced class stuff, which I was about to ask you. So in your, in you going from A to B, you're always hitting the roll cue, the last 3 or 4 words that the director, because they have all the scripts.
Yeah.
And I'm sure people watching this understand that the director's punching the cameras and rolling the video. But yeah, if you change the roll cue and they're being bombarded by a producer, because they're not always watching the TV.
Right. Yeah. They're not watching you do your thing. They have their job and they're paying attention, which goes back to when it comes to like practicing the live shot with the photographer. Okay, we're going to start here. We're going to go and talk about that. Like I don't want to throw the photographer off. I want to have a plan for how we're going to do this, and I need to commit to that, because I don't want them going, wait, where's he going now? Same deal with you know, a roll cue piece of language. You know, you owe it to that director to, as best you can, hit it exactly as the way it was planned, because they're waiting for that thing to do the next part of their job. Because, oh, by the way, they got a lot more to worry about than just your one little story. I mean, that's your whole thing, but that's just one of many they have to worry about. So yeah, you do owe it to basically everybody involved to commit to some lines, something. And, you know, when in doubt, you know, the best one is like, let's take a look at the video, or let's go to this a little bit ago, and I'm laughing and you're laughing, because that's like a pretty good safety valve, and pretty good is not exactly the way I describe it, but it's effective, and there isn't any question as to, is this when Ben wanted us to run the video? Well, he said, let's look at the video, let's hit it. And I don't know. I can't think of I can't even think of one time in the last year that I've ever like planned to have that be my roll cue. But I'm sure there'll be some time in the next year that I might. And maybe it's because I'll be highlighting the difference between what the world that looks like at this exact moment when we're live versus what it looked like earlier. You know, maybe the fire is out and now, but let's look at the video, because earlier, holy smokes, look at what so I mean, it has its purpose. just so long as it's not a crutch, I think. 'Cause if for no other reason than because, I don't know, it's, I think that you can write better than saying, let's look at the video. But I've done it before and I'll do it again.
Oh yeah, and I've had to do that out on live shots to where, and then these were super simple live shots. The story was easy, I certainly knew it. But you're out in the wild and sometimes you yourself get distracted. And unfortunately nowadays too, if somebody's sort of like briskly walking towards you, no matter who it is, you're like, oh, is this guy gonna like come in my shot?
Yeah.
Or is this gonna be like some person just trying to pop off? So I've lost my place, is the point. And I've totally done and if we look at the video, knowing, and comically so, because we're certainly people who are always the first to laugh at ourselves.
Yeah.
Where the people in TV back at the station know, oh man, something went wrong for him. Yeah, well, can't wait to hear sort of what the story behind the story is.